Has you ever stopped to think about how uh, global politics, economics, and even things happening right here at home are all, tangled up together?
It's incredibly complex, isn't it?
Totally. And today, we're doing a deep dive into some really fascinating sources that try to unpack exactly that. We're looking at clips from a June 2019 broadcast, The Next Revolution with Steve Hilton. It includes a panel discussion and an interview.
Right.
So our mission really is to just boil down the key arguments, the different viewpoints from these sources so you can kind of grasp the important stuff without getting totally swamped in information.
Makes sense. A shortcut through the noise.
Exactly. So let's jump in. The sources kick off with this pretty striking idea, this concept of an economic invasion as like a preferred strategy in foreign policy.
Yeah, and what's interesting is how the source defines what it calls the Trump doctrine. It basically paints a picture of using economic muscle, sanctions, tariffs as the main way to get things done internationally. The material really stresses that this is framed as an alternative to military action, focusing on jobs, 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 both here and overseas. It even brings up that Winston Churchill quote, jaw to jaw is better than war.
Implying that economic pressure becomes the main weapon of choice.
That's the idea presented, yeah. The preferred weapon, as the source puts it.
And the sources use Iran as a big case study for this doctrine, right?
Yeah.
What do they lay out about the situation there, especially compared to the previous nuclear deal?
Well, the broadcast argues pretty strongly that the old deal, the JCPOA, was weak. It claims sanctions were lifted for practically nothing, and that this essentially gave Iran a green light for future nuclear ambitions and allegedly freed up something like $150 billion that could be used to fund terrorism. That's the claim in the source.
Right. So how did the Trump administration's approach differ according to these sources?
Well, it's presented as a sharp contrast. The source says tough sanctions were put back in place in 2018, and these are described as crippling Iran's terror funding and crushing its economy.
Crippling how? Do they give specifics?
Yeah, they mention things like a nearly double budget deficit, really high inflation, and unemployment soaring. The main goal, as the president himself is quoted saying in the broadcast, was to push Iran to negotiate.
Okay.
There are a couple of quotes attributed to him like, I'm not looking for war, but you can't have a nuclear weapon. You want to talk good. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad economy for the next 3 years.
Forceful language.
And another one, you can't have nuclear weapons, and if you want to talk about it, good. Otherwise, you can live in a shattered economy for a long, long time to come. So, the message was pretty clear, according to the source.
But Iran didn't just roll over, did they? The sources mention tanker attacks, shooting down that drone.
Exactly. The interpretation in the broadcast is that Iran lashed out because they believed they could sort of survive the sanctions. But then there's this really interesting moment. The source highlights the decision not to launch a military strike after the drone incident.
Right, I remember that. They mentioned the potential casualty count.
Yeah. The source praises President Trump for stopping the strike after learning about an estimated 150 Iranian casualties. It calls it disproportionate.
And frames it how?
As a human, thoughtful decision, supposedly going against what the military establishment might have wanted.
And the source contrasts this with media coverage.
It does. It claims the mainstream media distorted the decision, made it look inconsistent. But the show's take was that he just asked a, quote, normal human question about casualties right at the end.
So the source is saying the media missed the nuance.
Kind of. The broader point the source makes is about this binary lie in foreign policy debates, like your only choices are appeasement or all-out war.
I see.
And economic sanctions, in this view, are presented as that nuanced third way, holding countries accountable without necessarily going to war.
Okay, that makes sense as a framework. But if the administration is trying to use this economic power, what about resistance? The sources talk about anti-American allies and something called swampiness.
Right, this is where it gets really tangled. Take Iran again. The source claims European allies were actively, quote, fighting to keep the useless Obama deal alive.
How? By doing business with Iran.
Exactly. Doing business, which the source says takes the pressure off Iran and lets them divide and survive. It gives specific examples, too.
Like what?
British businesses involved in a solar park, Vodafone working with an Iranian internet company, German Siemens with a huge, $1.5 billion rail contract, French carmaker Peugeot. Apparently, Iran was a third of their global market at one point.
Wow.
And the broadcast even connects French President Macron to Peugeot's past bailout calling him a former Rothschild banker. So
Yeah.
painting a picture of, financial ties.
And this isn't just about Iran, according to the sources. They mention Russia, too.
Yeah, the pattern continues. The source says that while the Trump administration was trying to pressure Russia on energy, Germany was moving ahead with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Which increases reliance on Russian gas, right?
Precisely. Undermining the U.S. pressure, according to the source. And it points out that the chairman of Nord Stream 2 is the former German Chancellor, Gerhard Schroeder.
Interesting connection. And China.
Same theme. Trump's tariffs are described as weakening China's economy, but again, the source claims allies are undermining the strategy, especially regarding China's huge infrastructure project, the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI.
Which the source portrays quite negatively.
Very. It calls it a plan for world domination, making countries dependent. And it cites the UK Treasury Secretary at the time, Philip Hammond, pledging commitment to BRI.
So where does the swampiness claim come in?
Well, the source argues this undermining by allies isn't about, high principle. It's about good old-fashioned swampiness.
Yeah.
Basically financial interest. It mentions former UK Prime Minister David Cameron leading a billion-dollar UK-China fund for BRI projects, and another former UK Treasury official, Danny Alexander, becoming VP of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is described as another BRI vehicle.
So the argument is that personal or national economic interests are trumping shared strategic goals.
That's exactly the claim, that allies are prioritizing, quote, cash, and in doing so, actually making future conflict more likely. It's a really striking accusation presented in the source.
It really is. It shows how these big foreign policy moves can get tangled up with business interests, both internationally and maybe domestically, too.
Absolutely.
So if the administration is dealing with that kind of swampiness abroad, what about challenges back home? The sources shift focus to domestic policy, right? Starting with immigration.
Yeah, they discuss the situation around Tom Homan potentially becoming a border czar and the president delaying deportations for 2 weeks to push Congress on asylum loopholes.
And the source includes different views on this, doesn't it? Not just one perspective.
That's right. It highlights an MSNBC roundtable, interestingly, with Latino voters in Florida. And some there apparently felt Trump was the most pro-Latino president.
Really? Why?
Because he was tough on immigration. The argument presented was that this helps legal immigrants by upholding the rule of law and ensuring safety. The source emphasizes this view that, quote, immigrants want proper border enforcement and that the border crisis isn't new, it's been decades in the making.
Okay, that's a perspective you don't always hear highlighted.
No. And the source also touches on the argument that laws are being exploited, citing claims of people literally renting children to pose as family units to get catch and release.
Which is the policy of releasing people while they await a court date.
Exactly. And the source notes that while President Obama actually deported more undocumented immigrants numerically under Trump, the whole issue became incredibly crazy controversial.
And there's a comment about Mexico in there, too.
Yeah, a pretty pointed observation from the source, that Mexico, at that moment, was doing more to stop illegal immigration than the entire Democrat Party.
Wow. That's quite a statement. It definitely adds another layer to the usual narrative.
It does. It challenges assumptions about who's doing what on border enforcement.
And this theme of accountability and maybe challenging the status quo, the sources suggest it extends beyond the border to the federal government itself, the bureaucracy.
Right. The broadcast really taps into this frustration that federal workers might be, as the source puts it, less accountable for their work standards compared to the private sector.
Leading to delays and inefficiency.
That's the connection made. They mention delays in getting laws implemented and even cite extreme examples like VA employees supposedly not being at their desks for years. Now, these are claims from the source material, of course.
Of course. And this leads to a proposed solution.
Yes, Senator David Perdue's Merit Act. The source details this proposed bill.
And what's the idea behind it?
It's apparently modeled on a 2017 VA reform bill that passed the Senate unanimously. That reform reportedly led to 4,300 removals for cause at the VA and improved veteran satisfaction scores.
Okay.
So the Merit Act aimed to take those same standards, making it easier for directors to remove employees for cause while still ensuring due process and apply them across all federal agencies.
Bring private sector style accountability to the public sector.
That's the stated goal highlighted in the source, yeah.
Right.
Bringing accountability and work performance standards.
But the source anticipates pushback.
It does. It speculates about potential democratic resistance, linking it to public sector unions and their political contributions, even though the VA reform vote was unanimous.
Interesting dynamic. It really raises that question, doesn't it? How do you ensure accountability in these huge government organizations? And what are the forces resisting change?
Absolutely. The source clearly frames it as a battle against entrenched systems.
So you've got these foreign policy battles, the domestic fights over immigration and bureaucracy. How did the administration package all this for the public as it looked towards re-election? The sources cover the 2020 campaign launch, right?
They do. They paint a picture of the kickoff rally in Florida. Big numbers mentioned 40,000 attendees, 120,000 supposedly trying to get in, raising money at a rate of $1 million an hour.
And they include that quote about losing when asked if he was prepared to lose.
Yeah, the quote is, "No, probably not. I don't like losing. I haven't lost very much." Classic Trump soundbite, highlighted by the source.
And the source takes a shot at the media and pulls again here.
It does. It criticizes the mainstream media for trying to, quote, conjure up a losing narrative and using polls against him, while also noting he was supposedly hitting record highs in USA Today polls at the time.
And what about the view of the Democrats presented in the source?
The source portrays them as becoming the increasingly loony left, arguing amongst themselves about full-fledged socialism, or to not call it socialism, and lacking a clear, unified platform. That's the perspective offered.
Okay. And the launch speech itself, the analysis in the source.
Well, it acknowledges the criticism, that it was just classic Trump, greatest hits, maybe too backward-looking.
But it offers a counter-argument.
Right. The counter-argument presented is that the speech was effective precisely because it reminded people he had delivered on those promises from 2016.
Like the economy, regulations, judges.
Exactly. Things like helping the forgotten man and woman, cutting regulations, the strong economy, jobs, Supreme Court picks. The message, according to this interpretation, was basically, you hired me to fight for you, I did what I said I'd do, but the job's not finished yet.
So less about a new vision, more about promises made, promises kept. Let's keep going.
That's the essence of the argument presented in the source. It's a really interesting look at how that particular political narrative was being constructed and presumably consumed.
So wrapping this all up, we've really covered a lot of ground based on these June 2019 sources. The focus on economic pressure and foreign policy, the complicated relationships with allies described, the domestic struggles with bureaucracy and immigration, and then setting the stage for the re-election campaign.
It definitely shows how interconnected everything is, at least through the lens of this particular broadcast. You can't really understand one piece without seeing how the source connects it to the others.
Absolutely. And the key thing for you listening is probably seeing how understanding these big political and policy debates often means looking past the headlines, digging into the specific arguments, and frankly, the interests that might be at play, just like these sources attempt to lay out.
Yeah, the sources provide a very specific, cohesive viewpoint connecting things like global trade deals, domestic hiring rules, and election rhetoric. It's quite a narrative they build.
It really is.
Yeah.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with, something to chew on from all this. If economic power really is becoming the preferred weapon in world affairs, as these sources strongly suggest, how does that internal swampiness within allied nations that focus on cash over strategy, as described here, how does that ultimately impact the global stage for everyone?
That's a big question with no easy answer, something to definitely think about.